Here's an old story, a fable, an ancient tale, perhaps. It came to me as I lay curled up under a cedar tree in a desert canyon one day, seeking respite from the heat. I thought the tree had lovely texture to her roots and bark, like braided hair, and I told her so. I've always spoken to trees, and this one surely heard me, for as I lay there, my mind moving in those other circles at the edge of sleep, I received a gift from her. It was a story about a man and a tree. It came all at once, rich with potency, but condensed, much like a seed. Later, as soon as I could, I opened the seed, and the story emerged all in a single burst of energy. Yes, I wrote these words, but in a real sense, I did not truly write this story. It was a gift from her, you see. Many years ago, there was a man whose heart had long forgotten its joy. He was a healer, and with the gifts of that art, he had spent all of his life helping those in his small village. No one could heal the wound he himself carried, however, for when he was a young man, he married the love of his life, only to lose her to a sickness he could not cure. This deep scar left him with an air of sadness and melancholy that shaped his life day after day, until the years found him old, and his body would no longer let him minister to others as he would desire to. His only relief from the toils of his days and the memories of his past was to walk into the green woods around the village, to sit and enjoy the natural beauty of the landscape, where grassy hills mixed with sections of verdant forest. There were many tall trees of different kinds, but one lovely tall cedar was his favorite place to rest and think. Over time, he had come to think of the cedar as a friend and confidant. He would speak to her, sometimes aloud, sometimes silently, and say all the things that crowded his mind in a manner he could not pursue with any other person. One day, feeling the fatigue of his years, he came again to his cedar and sat down in his place between two extended roots. He sighed and said, "Ah, dear tree, if only I had not lost my wonderful bell. I have lived a good life, and one with honor, but it has been without my companion. Her presence would have made my life so fine. Though I cannot complain, for I have come here for so many years, and you have always been my true companion, dear tree, standing here in all your beauty, to comfort me and hear my sorrows and my joys. I wish it could ever be so, but I know that I am soon gone from this life." As he lay there in the crook of the roots, he fell fast asleep. He had a dream. And in that dream, he heard the tree speaking to him in an earthy but pure golden voice.
You are my one true companion, always coming, always sharing. I am your true earth wood leaf friend, always waiting, always hearing. Would that you could stay here always, being, thinking, growing, feeling. This can be so now, my dear one, but you must agree to be like, tall and fruitful, green and woody. Only this way can we be now, ever faithful, always with you. Will you be so? Will you let me? Your true friend asks you. You must say so. The old man's heart was filled with joy and peace when he heard her speak, and instead of waking to his old life, he decided to remain in his dream. Through the night, he lay there in his place and slept more soundly than he had ever slept before. In the angles of his dreams, he heard small sounds and felt gentle movement, but none of these things woke him. Finally, though, he felt a new force of energy coming up through him like a tide, and he began to wake himself from his reveries. The sun was shining on a new day, and he awoke to a new life. For here he stood next to his lovely cedar tree, and he too had a form like unto hers, woody trunk and branches, and green leaves shimmering with life and happy excitement. Her transformation of him was complete. And so he stood next to her, not as a man whose body was worn out and ready for its end, but as a young and healthy tree whose farthest branches and leaves mingled slightly with her own. To his surprise, he found that he was not cedar tree, but apple tree. Ripe fruit already hung from his arms, and he knew that it was all exactly as it should be. He also found that he could speak directly with his beloved cedar, and she could speak with him. Now, at last, he had a companion with whom he could happily share, and she, in turn, could share her thoughts and life with him. The village missed their healer, but only one of his fellows found the apple tree and noted the sudden appearance of it where none had been before. The other villagers, not knowing the forest as well, did not find the apple tree strange, and soon the oddity was forgotten, and the healer was presumed lost. The village went back to its own thoughts and doings. For apple tree and cedar tree, however, life was renewed, and their long relationship was remade in a new form. They could talk, and they could watch the sun and the rains, and observe all the other forest plants and animals come and go, and live and perish. They could whisper through the nights, and speak softly to the other trees and plants. Occasionally, someone from the village would wander by and collect some of his apples, or sit in the shade of their branches and leaves. It was a wonderful and peaceful life together. And so the years went by, and Apple Tree grew tall and wide and thick of branch. His apples were always abundant and sweet, and his leaves were plenty for him to breathe deeply. As he thus strengthened and grew mature, however, Cedar Tree was, in the natural passage of time, growing old. Her voice became increasingly soft, and she would lapse into longer silences than before. His love for her made this a difficult thing to witness, but he knew that it was her true way now, and that he had not the knowledge to prevent it. Many years had passed since his rebirth as apple tree, and many days had been spent in the companionship and unquestioned love of his dear cedar tree. She had never been able to explain how she had made the transformation for him, other than to say that it was something that had its power in true love of the Spirit. She had been much older than him at the time he became tree, and her time had passed her. As she became weaker and found speech difficult, she would send him her true love in palpable waves, and he would respond, saying how much he loved her. Eventually, her voice was heard no more, and the vital spirit passed from her branches, and they slowly became dry, and then brittle. Apple Tree greatly mourned his loss, and his form suffered. He turned inward for several years, calling her name and listening for her voice once again. He did not bear apples or grow new wood. A pallor of darkness suffused the forest around him, and no one from the village would come through there or try to find fruit, though they could not have said just why. The grief of his loss never truly passed away from Apple Tree, but the power of its hold on him did at last relent. He began to feel the sunlight, and drink the rain, and listen to the rest of the forest. And the pallor over the woods lifted like a cloud. Many more years passed by, and Apple Tree marveled at his fortune of being able to be alive and to see and experience this new life. Slowly, he was able to put the memory of Cedar Tree in his heart's inner sanctuary and enjoy his life in honor of her. He grew wood again, and he produced apples that were bigger and better than any other tree in the forest. Life was worth living just for its own sake. Years passed by, and the forest changed some, but not so much. The village grew and then had a great illness that caused it to dwindle. After some time, it began to regain its population. These changes were part of the natural process of time, and Apple Tree, too, eventually felt the age of his wood coming upon him. It was then that someone from the village began to visit him. She was a young girl who came to the forest to collect fruits and herbs, Being somewhat adventurous of nature, she came a bit further afield than most and found Apple Tree and his wonderful apples. She loved to get away from the village and come out to the forest, where things were fresh and natural, and she found Apple Tree to be her favorite place of all, though she could not say just why. Her name was Grace, and she was truly graceful in her spirit. Apple Tree was always pleased when she would come by, and he felt happy for the first time since Cedar Tree's passing. He was especially pleased when Grace began to talk to him. She would spend hours chatting about her life in the village and her family and friends. She would tell Apple Tree about her problems and her fears, and about her joys and surprises. He remembered how he had once spoken to Cedar Tree in just this way, finding her beauty and serenity a safe place for his confidences. Now he could return this gift and be the loving listener for Grace. As several years passed in this way, Grace began to grow into a beautiful young woman. One day she came to Apple Tree glowing with excitement, for she had found a young man who loved her. They had become betrothed, and she made happy plans for her future life and the family she would soon have. All these things Apple Tree listened to with ease and patience, and he would send waves of loving out toward Grace, and the wind would come and rustle his green leaves. Once Grace brought the young man with her to Apple Tree, and he reached out to the boy's heart to see what kind of person he was. The fellow seemed friendly on his outsides, but Apple Tree could not see inside him. It was like he was a hidden seed, all rolled up and covered. Unlike her natural ease, Grace seemed nervous around him, and they did not stay very long. Then she did not come to see Apple Tree for many days, and he began to wonder and worry about her. A period of rains came then, and no one ventured out from the village. When sunshine returned and the ground dried, Apple Tree looked for Grace to come back out to him. When at last she came, she was walking slowly, like her mind was deeply somewhere else, and there were tears streaking her lovely face. She sat down in the crook of his roots and cried. "Oh, Tree, I thought I had found my husband, my life's love. We were almost to our marriage, and I found him with another. He was not even sorry or ashamed. He was like someone else that I did not know. I am devastated. Oh, what shall I do now?" She curled up in a ball at the base of his trunk and sobbed. His compassion for her was great, and he tried to send her his comfort as she lay there at his feet. Then she stirred and spoke again. "Oh, my friend, dear Apple Tree, you have been such a friend and comfort for me. I don't know why I come here and speak to you so. It has always just seemed the natural and right thing to do. You have always been my anchor, always there for me, no matter what I've been through, good or bad. How I wish people could be that way. Dear, beautiful Apple Tree, I love you for being my only true friend." Then she fell deeply asleep, nestled there in his roots. When she had said these things, Apple Tree felt something within him change, like a branch that suddenly shifts its position, but inside his spirit. He considered this for a while. Then it seemed to him that he knew what he could do. He could reach out and speak to Grace in her dreams. And so he did. "My dear Grace, so young and lovely, always coming, always speaking. My heart breaks for your misfortune, sadness, anger, promise broken. Would that I could take the burden. Let me feel it. You forget him. I know too well this is not so. We remember. We still feel it. I have always loved your dear heart, sharing, speaking, thinking, feeling. You have always come to cheer me, laughing, telling, joking, dancing. I cannot change what now has happened. I cannot make him be true caring. I can help, if you would let me. Changing, moving, different shapes now. If you want a love that stays true, you must think, and choose, and say so. Within her dream, Grace spoke to him, saying, Dear apple tree, if I could be like you and be with you, I would, for you are my truest friend. How can such a thing be, though? For I am not a tree, but a young woman with all her life ahead. Dearest apple tree. After a pause, while the wind stirred his leaves and played with sleeping Grace's hair, Apple Tree said, What you say is true and honest. Choosing nature, choosing your life. You are not tree, yet we are friends, sharing our thoughts and our spirits. There is one way. Will you trust me? Will you let me change and make new? If you say so, I can call it wonder, sunlight, power, root strength. I will love you either pathway, dearest Grace. Now think, and then sleep. Grace turned over in her sleep and began to sink deeper into its comforting darkness. But just before she lost all awareness within her dream, she spoke once more. Yes, she said. Sunlight gleamed and stroked Grace's face as she woke up from her afternoon sleep at the foot of the apple tree. She slowly stirred and wiped the moss and moisture from her face. In her lap, nestled in the folds of her simple dress, was the most beautiful and large apple she had ever seen. The sight of it woke her up completely, and she started with a cry, for she was no longer at the base of the apple tree. It was not there. She looked around her and saw that she was in the same forest, in the same place, but the tree was simply gone. Then she heard a deeply musical voice say, Grace. Turning around, she saw a young man standing before her. He was about her age, with the reddest, most healthy complexion on his round face that she had ever seen. His eyes sparkled with laughter and happiness, while seeming deep as the sky. His arms were strongly muscled, and his clothing seemed homespun but well-fitted. Suddenly, Grace understood, and she gingerly walked up to Apple Tree and took his hand. He and Grace made a home in the edge of the forest where they lived for all of their lives. They raised a family and provided the village with goods for many years, for he was the most skilled orchardman they had ever seen. He could bring forth so much fruit and have such large and healthy trees that it seemed he could almost talk to them.